The others fled and did not return to assist their comrades in the battle that followed. On May 28th, the 600 men of the 2nd Battalion Parachute Regiment won a great victory at Goose Green. After 14 hours of heavy fighting, the Argentine garrison of 1,200 surrendered. Meanwhile, an SAS patrol discovered that Mount Kent, a vital hill position just 10 miles west of Stanley, was only lightly defended by the Argentines. Lieutenant Colonel Rose immediately inserted the whole of D Squadron to hold the position. For days, the SAS fought off repeated attacks until reinforcements arrived. The Royal Marines crossing the northern flank of West Falkland to Port Stanley were led by their own Special Forces unit, the Mountain and Arctic Warfare Cadre. These Marines were trained to fight and survive in the most difficult terrain and weather conditions anywhere in the world. On May 31st, one of the cadre's 4-man patrols spotted an Argentine position held by 17 of their elite Special Forces commandos at a desolate and isolated farmhouse called Top Malo. The Royal Marines alerted their commander, Captain Rod Boswell, who decided to mount a raid with all the men he had available. The 19 Marines were split into 2 teams, with the fire group on one hill overlooking Top Malo House. Its task was to provide support fire as the 12-man assault group charged the buildings from an adjacent hill. The Marines were not impressed by their opponent's combat readiness.
Their professionalism left a little bit to be desired, and they shouldn't have been in an isolated farmhouse, most certainly not inside it anyway, and if they were, they should have had sentries well clear of the building to cover the approaches. And we gave a few indications of our presence. We'd stampeded some sheep by accident, obviously. We'd come across some sheep, we'd come in a helicopter, and a real professional bunch would have made up for that. But they made up for their lack of professionalism by their courage. I mean, they certainly did not lack courage.
The battle was to begin with the fire group hitting the house with anti-tank rockets. Boswell had intended the assault group to advance in 2 mutually supporting sections. But things didn't go exactly as planned.
And I will always remember the charge. I mean, my memories of running in and thinking, they've all disobeyed me to a man, fantastic.
All his men had leapt to their feet and charged with fixed bayonets. The Argentines were caught completely unaware.
These men hadn't, the first warning they had of our presence was a building exploding all around them. They all got out of the house, those that could, and every man that got out of that house fought. They all got out with their weapons, and they fought with their weapons until they couldn't fight any longer.
The Argentine survivors of the initial bombardment rushed out of the building and ran to a stream. There they took up positions along its bank. The ammunition inside Top Malo House exploded and the building caught fire. The smoke masked the advance of the Marines as they charged towards the Argentines. The Marines fired their grenade launchers over the building and onto the Argentine commandos hidden along the stream bank. 2 in the assault groups were severely injured by gunshot wounds in the intense firefight. Meanwhile, the British fire group moved forward under cover of the burning building. And then emerged from behind the burning building and attacked the Argentines from the flank. A grenade killed the Argentine commander and the remainder surrendered. 5 Argentines were dead and 12 captured, 7 of those injured. Only 3 British were wounded. In the 28-minute battle, the Argentine Special Forces troops had been decisively beaten. After tending to the wounded, there was one final task: to check out the battlefield.
The building by that time had completely fallen down. There was one other little task. There was one, we'd checked the peak building. We'd obviously fairly successfully taken out the house and the sheep building. And there was one other building, the outhouse, that had to be cleared. And the nearest man to it was called McGregor, so I shouted down to McGregor, clear the outhouse.
And Captain Boswell shouted to me to clear that toilet. And I think what he expected me to do was to go over and knock at the door and say, "Excuse me, would you like to come out and join us? We've had a little fight here." But as it was, I turned around and I thought, there's no way I'm going over there, just in case one of them happened to be in there. So I let off the whole magazine in the toilet. And the methane that was in the little bucket in these outside toilets exploded and blew the toilet completely up. And all the guys who were around here thought, well, that's just a lovely culmination to the whole thing. We all cheered as this toilet disappeared in a big blue flame. They all thought, well, that's a culmination of the whole thing. And that was the end of Top Mallow, really, when the toilet disappeared.
The Argentine troops in the hills overlooking Stanley would now feel the full brunt of the British offensive. As British forces prepared for the final battle to recapture the Falklands, the guns of the Royal Artillery pounded the Argentine positions around the island's capital, Stanley. From the end of May until June 10th, when the main battle for Stanley would begin, SAS teams were active on both East and West Falkland. Four-man patrols continued their reconnaissance mission. On June 5th, one of these patrols was deployed to man an observation post at Fox Bay on West Falkland. On June 10th, they were discovered by an Argentine patrol. Although heavily outnumbered, the patrol commander engaged the enemy in a fierce firefight to allow his men time to withdraw. Despite severe wounds, Captain Gavin Hamilton fought on until he was killed. He was awarded the Military Cross posthumously. The islanders communicated with each other by radio. Knowing this, the SAS would use the same frequency to conduct a psychological warfare campaign against the Argentine High Command. At this stage of the war, however, only the doctor, Alison Bleaney, was allowed to use the radio in order to treat her patients. On June 8th, the SAS made their first contact with the Argentines through her. From then on, the SAS applied increasing pressure on the Argentines to accept honorable surrender rather than a final futile battle for Stanley with inevitable civilian casualties. On the night of June 13th, as the battles for the hills overlooking Stanley raged, the SAS and the SBS mounted one last diversionary raid in conjunction with the Royal Marines' 1st Raiding Squadron. After a clandestine briefing, the rigid raider assault boat set off across Howden Water to attack an Argentine logistics base near Stanley. The raiders consisted of 3 SAS troops and 6 men from the SBS in 4 rigid raiders. As their assault boats hit the shoreline, searchlights from an Argentine hospital ship illuminated them, even though the Geneva Conventions forbid any medical unit from playing part in active combat. Every gun in the area opened up on the raiders. The raiders made a hasty retreat, but now they pointed their craft at the hospital ship. Rounds flew back and forth, striking the hospital ship and the rigid raiders. Once behind the hospital ship, the torrent of fire eased up, but one of the boats was hit in its outboard engine and barely made it to safety. All 4 rigid raiders were completely burnt out. Miraculously, only 3 men were injured. Meanwhile, in the hills overlooking Stanley, the SAS used laser target designators to direct Harriers carrying laser-guided bombs.
Roger. A bit plus of where we were aiming. Okay, bomb's gone. There's the bomb. Got it? Okay, switch on. Yes, got it. Just a little bit over from where I was aiming. An absolute beauty, I would say. Probably where there is a defensive position.
What was it, 1,000 pounder?
Yeah.
Roger, I have my number 2 with other weapons if you'd like them to deliver on a...
It's spot on here.
They also directed devastating artillery fire against Argentine troops in the hills. The fire was effective. On the morning of June 14th, the majority of Argentines fled their positions. The SAS observers stopped fire, and the survivors retreated unmolested. The Argentines were now in full retreat. At 1100 hours on June 14th, the Argentine High Command contacted the SAS to discuss the terms of a ceasefire. Lieutenant Colonel Mike Rose boarded a Gazelle helicopter and flew to Stanley. Accompanying him were an SAS signaller and Captain Rod Bell, a Royal Marine officer who spoke fluent Spanish. After hours of negotiations, General Mario Menendez was persuaded that surrender was the only sensible course.
There is a white flag flying over Stanley. Very marvelous.
The Land Force commander, Major General Jeremy Moore, accepted the Argentine surrender at midnight the same day. The following signal was sent to London via satellite. The Falkland Islands are once more under the government desired by their inhabitants. God save the Queen. More than 700 Argentines and 253 British troops had died in the process. The Falklands War could not have been won without the Special Forces. Their skills ensured a safe landing for the main British force after its 8,000-mile journey. And during the land campaign that followed, the Special Forces helped maintain the pressure that brought the whole campaign to a triumphant conclusion, only 72 days after Argentina had first raised its flag over the islands.